part 3 of my quick run through. Okay, so we just loop through my array of strings, basically creating departments. Since all I have to add is a name, it's pretty straightforward and easy, right? Just create a new department object, assign the name, insert on submit, save changes over and over again for every string value I have. Okay. Now a little bit more work because I have more properties for an employee, but also I wanted to add some variety so they didn't all have the same birth date, they didn't all have the same values for everything. I know I'm also going to mix up the first and last names, give every combination, but as well I'm just going to use a random number here, establish an initial start date, and then I'll randomly take days away from it to simulate different start dates for different people. Okay, so I do need to grab my list of departments so I can assign departments randomly to the different people as I create them as employees. Then we have our nested for each loops. So for every last name, I'll loop through every first name, right? So I get every combination of first and last names by the time I'm done. Inside the loop, we're just using a bit of random work here to randomly choose a department for the employee. We create the employee, assign this first and last name from our loops, randomly select a name for the job title, randomly select a salary between a couple of bounds, right? And notice I threw in math.py just for fun, just to kind of give a bit bigger range and so on. And then for our start date, I'm just subtracting a random number of days up to 1,500 days from that initial value I put in. So this is all just for fun, really. It's just to get some sample data there. Nothing right or wrong about this. You can just initially just create one or two manually if you want to, right? It's totally up to you. Okay, so that's basically everything. Let me just save. Now we're ready to start doing some work. Now, the central hub for our work, as we said, is really our app object. And we can access the code behind for our app object here. So the next thing we really need to do then is create a few public variables inside our app object, right? So before the constructor, I'll just stick in here 3 public variables. Now it's complaining a little bit, understandably, because it doesn't know what these are. However, my good friend here, control period, will let me add the using just for my models folder because I put them in a separate subfolder. Now it says, oh, I know what you mean. I understand now. So I have 3 different public objects here. Basically the active database, right? The active department and the active employee. So sticking them in this app object just means that I can quickly access them anytime from anywhere just by creating a reference to it. It's actually pretty quick and efficient because I'm not actually creating a new object. I just have them once, right? And then I just add references to them whenever I need them. Okay. Now we have to do a little bit of work in the constructor because when we start the app, okay, obviously we're going to run the constructor for the app itself. And so I'm just going to come down here to the end of the constructor, put in my little bit of code to call make test DB, right? So it'll just generate the database if it doesn't exist, populate it with my sample data. By the way, once it is created, it won't do it over and over again. It just checks if it exists, and if it does, hey, it's happy, right? So it doesn't actually do this repeatedly unless I take out that bit of commenting so that it actually drops and creates it every time. And then it just, of course, as I said, this whole process disposes of its connection and everything as soon as it's done. So it does its work and it packs up and goes home. It says, I'm done for the day. Right? So that's why we need to make our new company DB object when we're finished. And that's going to be the one we're going to store as our active DB globally inside our app object so we can just reference it and get it from anywhere. So we have a ready to go connection. The phone line is open. Anytime we want to, we can talk to the database through the active DB. So that's almost everything we need so we can go to the page, right? Because this is the page that we actually start working with the data. So I have a pretty basic page here, not much to it, right? A couple things I might want to change. The page name here, I might want to call it, instead of page name, company. Something like that. I don't know. Well, actually, I'll maybe call it employees because I'm going to show all the employees. And the application is I'll call company. I have room, I can put the whole thing company application. Okay, so the real work I'm going to do is inside our content panel here, right? We have a grid set up and ready to put content. So let me just come over here, and inside the grid, this is almost as far as we ended yesterday. I'm just going to throw a list box, right? List box is right in the toolbox, by the way. You'll find it right there. It just allows us, of course, to repeat in this case, we're using a data template for every bound object, right? So we can show it over and over again for every record in our system. Notice the binding expressions here. We have 2 text blocks in our stack panel. The first one is bound to the full name, the second one to the position. If you think back, those are those 2 summary properties I'd added, okay, specifically to make it easy to show this, right? Rather than having to worry about binding to the first name and then the last name and so on. By putting it together into a single field, it makes it very easy to bind to the whole thing, and away I go. Now in XAML, I'm not actually specifying the binding for the list itself. That I'll do in code. So going to the code behind, well actually, let me get there a specific way. I'll show you first. I kind of skipped over this yesterday. We don't have a lot in here right now. There's the constructor for the page itself, okay? And down below here, commented out, is some sample code on how to create the application bar in code. You can do almost everything in this tool either strictly in code or in XAML, or combine the 2. You can do some work with the XAML and some work in code. So it's giving you here how to create an application bar that shows up at the bottom of the screen with little buttons you can click. It's nice. It's a nice feature in the Windows Phone because they're always available. Okay, you can swipe it up a little, get the little captions under the buttons, but normally they're hidden. But it's a nice way to have buttons that are always on the screen, right? So we're going to look at utilizing the application bar in a few minutes. But in the meantime, I want to put something in the loaded event of the page, and I don't see it here. To get it, the easiest way is, let me go back to the XAML itself, right? We've used this before, this approach. Basically, the properties dialog box also has the events of whatever object has the focus. Trouble is, it's often a little tricky. How do I get focus on the page as opposed to some text block or some stack panel or something? Well, the easiest thing is click anywhere up here in the opening phone application page, right? The opening tag of the whole page, and now the properties window is focused on the page. So then I can go to the events, come down here to the loaded event, double click, and there we go. It added the reference to it in the actual XAML, and now we have our loaded event here for the page. So the simple approach, this is as far as we got yesterday, was to just add a bit of code in here, right? Little control period work. Just a reference to my models folder. So I had a student ask me, well, what about that? Aren't we, creating these application objects all the time? But think about it, it's not actually making the object. It's just getting a reference to our object, right? So it actually is very, very little in terms of overhead here. It's not an inefficiency to be doing this. It's just saying, give me a reference to the app object, and that gives us an easy way to access everything inside it. So then we get the active DB, right? And we can just query it this way. .employees, well, that's a link query, right? This whole thing here from employee emp in activedb.employees select. So that's the same kind of link that we did last year, no big deal. And all we're doing is my list control, the XAML list control shown in the page, I'm just setting the item source here in code. You could do that in the XAML, but of course I haven't created the employees collection yet there, so it makes more sense to do that work here in code. So with that done, I can pick any emulator I want, and hopefully, yes, we're about to start the new stuff.